In just 42 seconds, billionaire Cantor Fitzgerald CEO Howard Lutnick confidently dismissed Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's question about undisclosed trading practices. But what happened next sent shockwaves through the Financial Services Committee hearing room. The document she calmly slid across the table would not only silence the Wall Street titan, but fundamentally alter the debate about market transparency in America. The wood-paneled congressional hearing room gleamed under the harsh lighting that morning. American flags stood rigid behind the elevated committee Ds, while the Great Seal of the United States loomed over proceedings designed to project authority and accountability. Banking executives in immaculate suits filled the witness table, their collective net worth greater than the GDP of many nations. This wasn't just another congressional hearing. This was the culmination of months of investigation into market practices that had remained deliberately obscured from public view. Practices that affected millions of American investors without their knowledge. At stake was nothing less than confidence in the fundamental fairness of American financial markets. Jasmine Crockett sat composed at the committee dais, her expression revealing nothing as she listened to Howard Lutnick's polished testimony. Unlike many of her colleagues who relied on staff-prepared questions, Crockett's notepad contained her own meticulous research, detailed financial calculations, trading patterns, and regulatory citations annotated in her precise handwriting. Across the room, Howard Lutnick projected the effortless confidence that had made him a Wall Street legend. The man who had rebuilt Cantor Fitzgerald after losing 658 employees on September 11th was accustomed to navigating difficult situations with unshakable self-assurance. His testimony had thus far followed the familiar Wall Street playbook, technical enough to sound authoritative while vague enough to reveal nothing consequential. The dynamics were clear to everyone watching. A first-term congresswoman with limited time facing, off against one of the most sophisticated financial operators in America, a man who had testified before Congress a dozen times without ever revealing more than he intended. The power imbalance wasn't just assumed, it was expected. What no one in that room could anticipate, however, was that for 6 months, Congresswoman Crockett had been building a case that would be impossible to dismiss with practiced talking points. She had worked with financial whistleblowers, analyzed thousands of trading records, and identified a pattern that even the most careful market manipulation couldn't completely hide. In less than 1 minute, she would transform from a questioner into a prosecutor, armed with evidence that would leave one of Wall Street's most composed figures visibly shaken. If you believe markets should work for everyone, not just insiders, make sure to like this video and subscribe. What you're about to witness isn't just a viral moment. It's the rare instance when years of hidden financial practices are exposed in real time, changing how we understand Wall Street's relationship with everyday investors forever. Before becoming the Congresswoman, now preparing to question Howard Lutnick, Jasmine Crockett had built her reputation on meticulous preparation and an unwavering commitment to accountability. A former criminal defense attorney with a background in finance, she brought to Congress not just legal expertise, but a sophisticated understanding of how financial systems could be manipulated to benefit insiders at the expense of ordinary investors. Mr. Lutnick, Committee Chair Patrick McHenry announced, "Congresswoman Crockett will now have 5 minutes for questioning." Lutnick nodded slightly, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit jacket, a subtle but practiced gesture that projected calm authority. Behind him sat a row of Cantor Fitzgerald attorneys and executives, each with identical blue folders and stoic expressions. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Crockett began, her voice measured and precise. "Mr. Lutnick, I'd like to discuss your firm's market-making activities, particularly regarding retail order flow and price improvement. Those following financial markets immediately recognize the significance. Retail order flow, the practice of routing small investors' trades to specific market makers had become increasingly controversial as evidence mounted that the practice disadvantaged retail investors despite industry claims to the contrary. Congresswoman, we're proud of our price improvement statistics," Lutnick responded with practiced ease. "Last year alone, we delivered over $120 million in price improvement to retail investors, helping everyday Americans get better executions than they would on public exchanges." The statistics sounded impressive, which was precisely their purpose. Similar figures had been cited in dozens of congressional hearings to deflect more substantive questioning about market structure. What viewers didn't know yet was that for months, Crockett had been working with financial mathematicians to reverse engineer these statistics, uncovering a very different reality hidden behind the impressive-sounding numbers. "That's an interesting figure, Mr. Lutnick," Crockett replied. "I'd like to explore how your firm calculates price improvement, because my understanding suggests those calculations may not reflect what most people would consider improvement." A subtle shift crossed Lutnick's expression, barely perceptible but noticed by those who had watched him testify before. It was the look of someone who suddenly recognized they might be facing more sophisticated questioning than anticipated. "Our calculation methodology follows industry standards. Congresswoman, we measure the difference between the execution price and the national best bid or offer at the time of order receipt." It was a textbook answer, technically accurate while omitting critical context about how those standards systematically overstated benefits to retail investors. And do those industry standards account for market movements during order processing, or the fact that many retail orders would naturally receive midpoint pricing on lit exchanges without your involvement? Crockett had asked. The specificity of the question signaled something that made several Cantor Fitzgerald executives exchange glances. This wasn't the typical congressional questioning that could be deflected with general statements about helping Main Street investors. This was someone who understood the technical mechanics of market execution. Those standards have been accepted by regulators, and I'm not asking about regulatory acceptance. "Mr. Lutnick," Crockett interjected calmly, "I'm asking whether your calculation methodology accounts for these specific factors that would significantly reduce your claimed improvement figures." Behind Lutnick, one of his attorneys began writing rapidly on a legal pad, sliding it forward as Lutnick glanced down to read it. "Congresswoman, market structure is highly complex. The methodology you're suggesting would be impractical to implement at scale and doesn't reflect how markets actually function." It was another practice deflection, one that had successfully diverted similar questions in past hearings by suggesting critics simply didn't understand market complexity. Crockett didn't react to the implicit condescension. Instead, she simply opened a folder on her desk with deliberate calm. "Mr. Lutnick, are you familiar with an internal Cantor Fitzgerald presentation from March 17th of this year titled Retail Flow Profitability Analysis? Calculation Methodologies and Marketing Strategies?" The question landed with precision. Lutnick's expression changed almost imperceptibly, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a momentary stillness that hadn't been there before. Behind him, his legal team sat suddenly straighter. "I can't comment on specific internal documents without reviewing them first," he replied, his voice maintaining its professional tone, despite the sudden tension evident to close. Observers. What the public didn't yet know, but Lutnick clearly suspected, was that Crockett had obtained a confidential internal presentation in which Cantor Fitzgerald executives explicitly discussed how their public F-facing price improvement methodology was designed to maximize marketing value rather than accurately reflect actual investor benefits. As financial bloggers watching the live stream began speculating about what document Crockett might have, Twitter activity around the hearing spiked dramatically. Market analysts who had been half listening while doing other work suddenly focused their full attention on the exchange. "I understand," Crockett replied with the same measured tone. "Perhaps I can refresh your memory by quoting directly from page 17 of this presentation, where your head of retail strategy writes, and I quote, 'Current calculation methodology provides optimal marketing statistics while remaining technically defensible. Alternative methodologies would reduce reported improvement by 70 to 85%, but would more accurately reflect actual investor experience.'" The silence that followed seemed to stretch beyond its actual seconds. Committee members who had been checking phones or reviewing notes now focused intently on the exchange. Reporters in the gallery began sending urgent messages to their editors. Howard Lutnick, who had navigated the 2008 financial crisis, rebuilt a company from devastating tragedy, and faced countless challenging situations, now found himself in unfamiliar territory. confronted with his own company's words that directly contradicted his congressional testimony. "Congresswoman, I would need to see that document in context," he finally responded. His voice still controlled, but with an undercurrent that keen observers immediately recognized as concern. "I'd be happy to provide it," Crockett replied. "In fact, I'd like to enter this document into the official record. Mr. Chairman." As the presentation made its way to the committee, Clark, the hearing room transformed from routine oversight to something far more consequential. This wasn't just another congressional exchange of talking points. This was documented evidence that one of Wall Street's most prominent firms had explicitly acknowledged a systematic misrepresentation of benefits to retail investors. What followed would become one of the most revealing examinations of Wall Street practices ever captured on Capitol Hill. Not through grandstanding or political theater, but through meticulous preparation and precise questioning that even the most sophisticated financial operators couldn't deflect. "Mr. Lutnick, while the committee reviews this document," Crockett continued, her tone remaining professional and measured, "I'd like to discuss what your presentation describes as segmentation strategies for retail order flow." The shift in topic might have seemed like a reprieve to outside observers, but financial experts watching recognized it as a strategic expansion of the examination. Order flow segmentation, the practice of treating different customer orders differently based on their profitability to the market maker, was one of Wall Street's most closely guarded operational secrets. "Congresswoman, we process all retail orders according to our regulatory obligations," Lutnick responded. His composure outwardly intact, but his answers now notably more cautious. "Our commitment is to providing the best possible executions regardless of order source." "That's an interesting assertion," Crockett replied, particularly in light of Section 3 of the document I just submitted titled Profitability Segmentation Framework. According to this section, Cantor Fitzgerald categorizes retail brokers into 4 tiers based on what you call the sophistication metric. "Could you explain what this metric measures?" The question was precision-targeted. The sophistication metric was internal industry, terminology for measuring how informed or uninformed different groups of retail traders were, with less sophisticated meaning less informed traders being more profitable. For market makers to trade against a Lutnick paused slightly longer than his previous responses. "Congresswoman, all market participants analyze order flow characteristics. This is standard industry practice to ensure we can continue providing liquidity across various market conditions." "That doesn't answer my question, Mr. Lutnick," Crockett responded calmly. "The document specifically states that brokers with lower sophistication metrics receive payment for order, flow rates averaging 43% higher than those with higher metrics while receiving execution quality. That is, and again I'm quoting directly adjusted to, maintain minimum regulatory compliance while optimizing capture rates." Financial Twitter erupted. Market structure experts began posting analyses of what this revelation meant. Adjusted execution quality and optimizing capture rates were industry euphemisms for extracting maximum profit from less informed traders while giving them only the minimum execution quality required by regulations. "The terminology in internal documents can be technical," Lutnick attempted, his customary confidence now visibly strained. "Without the full context, let me provide more context then," Crockett interrupted, her tone still conversational but unyielding. "Page 24 contains a profitability analysis by broker, showing that your firm provides dramatically different execution quality to different retail brokers based not on what's best for their customers, but on how profitable those customers are to trade against." The C-SPAN camera caught the reaction of several committee members' widened eyes and exchanged glances that transcended typical partisan divisions. This wasn't political theater. It was a methodical exposure of practices that disadvantaged retail investors across the political spectrum. "All executions meet regulatory requirements," Lutnick stated, now clearly on the defensive, meeting minimum regulatory requirements while systematically extracting maximum profit from less informed investors isn't the same as the market fairness you described. "In your opening statement, is it, Mr. Lutnick?" Crockett asked before he could respond. She continued. "But let's move to Section 4, which I find particularly troubling. This section outlines what your document calls information leakage mitigation strategies. According to this section, your firm has developed methods to, and I quote, monetize order flow information while maintaining technical compliance with confidentiality requirements. The implications were severe and immediate. Information leakage. The practice of using knowledge about incoming retail orders to profit or share that information with favored clients was not just ethically questionable, but potentially illegal, depending on how it was conducted. Lutnick's attorneys were now frantically writing notes. One leaned forward to whisper urgently in his ear. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. The Wall Street titan, who had entered the hearing expecting routine questioning, was now facing documented evidence of practices that raised serious regulatory concerns. Congresswoman, that characterization doesn't accurately reflect. Let me be very specific. Mr. Lutnick, Crockett said, turning to page 38 of the document. This page describes a practice your firm calls latency-based information distribution, where details about retail order flow are made available to certain clients through, and again I'm quoting, timing differentials that maintain technical separation while providing actionable advantages. Financial experts watching immediately recognized the significance. This described a practice where information about retail orders was being provided to favored clients in ways designed to circumvent regulations while still giving them trading advantages. The committee room had fallen completely silent. Even members typically disengaged during financial hearings were now fully attentive, recognizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Mr. Lutnick, would you agree that providing certain clients with advantages based on knowledge of other investors' orders might constitute a form of fronter running, even if structured to technically comply with regulatory language? Crockett asked. The question was masterfully crafted, not accusing Lutnick of breaking specific regulations, but asking him to acknowledge that the practices described in his own firm's document violated the principles those regulations were designed to protect. Congresswoman, he began, then paused, visibly calculating the implications of various responses. I would need to review the specific practices being described before commenting. The specific practices are detailed in your firm's own presentation. Crockett replied, a presentation that explicitly acknowledges these strategies are designed to maintain technical compliance while providing advantages that the regulations were specifically created to prevent. Social media was now exploding with reactions. Financial news networks cut into regular programming for breaking coverage. Reporters were sending urgent updates describing the hearing as a watershed moment for market structure transparency. Let me turn to a different section, Crockett continued, her methodical approach unrelenting. On page 42, your team outlines a strategy called synthetic internalization through strategic routing, which appears designed to circumvent regulatory efforts to improve market transparency. The document states that this approach, and I quote, preserves margin advantages of internalization while creating an audit trail that suggests competitive routing. Each quotation was more damaging than the last, not interpretation or accusation, but Cantor Fitzgerald's own words describing strategies explicitly designed to appear compliant while undermining the purpose of the regulations. Lutnick, now visibly uncomfortable, glanced at the committee chairman as if hoping for intervention. Finding none, he returned to Crockett's steady gaze. Congresswoman, internal discussions about regulatory compliance often explore various interpretations of complex rules. That doesn't mean, Mr. Lutnick, Crockett interrupted, her voice now carrying a new gravity. This document doesn't explore interpretations. It explicitly outlines strategies designed to create the appearance of compliance while deliberately subverting regulatory intent. Page 57 literally contains a section called Regulatory Blind Spots, Opportunities, and Exploitation Strategies. The room reacted audibly. Subtle but unmistakable sounds of surprise from those who understood the significance of such explicit language in an internal corporate document. Financial regulations operated largely on the assumption that firms might aggressively interpret rules, but wouldn't explicitly strategize to exploit regulatory weaknesses. I want to be very clear about something, Crockett continued. a tone now carrying moral rather than just technical authority. The practices detailed in this document don't just disadvantage abstract retail investors. They directly harm teachers' retirement accounts, parents saving for their children's education, and ordinary Americans trying to build financial security. When your document discusses optimizing capture rates from uninformed flow, but it's talking about taking money from these Americans through information and technological advantages they don't even know exist. This framing shifted the discussion from technical market structure to something far more accessible and damning. Committee members from both parties were now paying rapt attention. Recognizing the political significance of practices that harmed constituents across the ideological spectrum, Lutnick, a veteran of countless difficult situations, attempted to regain control. Congresswoman Cantor Fitzgerald has helped build liquid, efficient markets that have dramatically reduced costs for all investors compared to 20 years ago. Cherry-picking phrases from internal documents doesn't reflect the broader benefits we provide to the market. It was a classic pivot to the industry's standard defense, focusing on long-term cost reductions while avoiding the question of who benefits from current market structures. "Mr. Lutnick, I'm not cherry-picking phrases," Crockett replied, her composure unshaken. "I'm quoting directly from a comprehensive strategic document produced by your firm, a document that explicitly outlines methods to create the appearance of best execution while systematically extracting profits from less informed investors. A document that directly contradicts the public testimony you provided to this committee less than an hour ago. The contrast could not have been more stark. The polished Wall Street executive, now facing his firm's own words, laid bare for public examination by a congresswoman who had done something rarely seen in these hearings. She had come more prepared than the witness. "I think the American people deserve to know," Crockett concluded, "whether the markets they invest in are actually fair and transparent, or whether they're systematically designed to benefit insiders while creating only the appearance of fairness. The document I've submitted today suggests the latter, and I believe that demands not just this committee's attention, but a fundamental reevaluation of how our markets are regulated." As her questioning time expired, the hearing room remained in unusual silence. There was no immediate pivot to the next questioner, no shuffling of papers or checking of phones. Instead, there was the collective recognition that something extraordinary had just occurred, not through rhetorical flourishes or political grandstanding, but through meticulously prepared, substantive examination that had revealed, in Wall Street's own words, how the financial system really worked. The chairman cleared his throat, breaking the extended silence that had followed Crockett's questioning. "We'll take a brief 15-minute recess," he announced, an unusual mid-hearing break that signaled the gravity of what had just transpired. As Lutnick and his team huddled in intense conversation, their body language revealing the crisis management now underway. Financial markets were already responding. Cantor Fitzgerald's publicly traded competitors saw their stocks drop as traders speculated about industry-wide exposure to similar practices. Regulatory-focused chat rooms filled with discussions about potential enforcement actions. Legal experts began publishing rapid analyses of possible securities law violations. When the hearing resumed, the shift in dynamic was immediately apparent. Committee members who had planned routine questions about market structure now focused intently on the Cantor-Fitzgerald document, requesting specific clarifications about practices described within it. Even representatives typically sympathetic to Wall Street adopted notably more critical stances. "Before we continue," the chairman announced, "Mr. Lutnick has requested a moment to address the committee regarding the document entered into record." Lutnick, his composure partially recovered, but his typical confidence noticeably diminished, leaned toward the microphone. "I want to thank Congresswoman Crockett for bringing this document to the committee's attention," he began, his tone carefully measured. "Having now reviewed it during the break, I can confirm it appears to be an authentic internal presentation, though one that was not approved at the executive level and does not reflect Cantor Fitzgerald's official policies or practices. The attempted distance from the document was predictable, but ultimately ineffective. Financial experts immediately noted that the presentation included executive-level contribution and sign-off indicators on its cover page, while I stand by my testimony regarding our firm's Commitment to Market Quality. Lutnick continued, I acknowledge that this document raises serious concerns that warrant immediate internal investigation. I have already directed our compliance department to conduct a comprehensive review, and we will cooperate fully with any regulatory inquiries. It was as close to a concession as a Wall Street executive had made in congressional testimony in recent memory. Not a full admission, but an unmistakable retreat from the confident assertions made earlier in the hearing. When questioning resumed, Crockett's approach had transformed the entire tone of the proceeding. Representatives who typically used hearing time for general statements now asked specific, technically informed questions about market practices. Financial reporters described the shift as unprecedented in modern congressional oversight of Wall Street. But the impact extended far beyond the hearing room. Financial news networks had abandoned regular programming for special coverage of what Bloomberg was already calling a watershed moment in market structure oversight. Social media platforms reported record engagement on financial topics as clips of the exchange spread to audiences typically disengaged from market structure discussions. What Congresswoman Crockett did today wasn't just effective questioning, noted a CNBC market analyst. She fundamentally changed the information, a symmetry that has defined the relationship between Wall Street and Congress. She came to that hearing knowing more about Cantor Fitzgerald's practices than they expected anyone outside their firm to. No, that observation captured something essential about why the moment had resonated so widely. This wasn't the typical congressional hearing where Wall Street executives controlled the information landscape. This was what happened when substantive preparation overcame the power dynamics that typically insulated financial practices from genuine accountability. By mid-afternoon, the SEC had issued an unusual public statement acknowledging awareness of the hearing and indicating it was reviewing the matters raised regarding market structure and execution practices. 3 state attorneys general announced their offices were opening investigations into potential consumer protection violations based on the practices described. But perhaps the most significant immediate impact came from within the financial industry itself. 2 major retail brokers announced they were pausing payment for order flow arrangements pending review of execution quality metrics and practices. Leading Financial Exchange issued a statement supporting enhanced transparency requirements for all trading venues, including internal execution facilities. These industry responses reflected the recognition that Crockett's methodical exposure had changed the political viability of defending the status quo. When Wall Street's own documents explicitly acknowledged systematic disadvantages to retail investors, the typical defenses became politically toxic across the ideological spectrum. As the hearing concluded, financial governance experts were already describing it as a case study in effective congressional oversight, not through performative confrontation, but through substantive mastery of complex subject matter. What we witnessed today wasn't just a viral moment, observed a former SEC commissioner on CNN. It was a demonstration of how congressional oversight is supposed to work. Congresswoman Crockett didn't come with general concerns or gotcha questions. She came with specific evidence of practices that directly contradict public representations. That's accountability in its most effective form. Outside the hearing room, reporters surrounded Crockett, shouting questions about how she had obtained the document and what regulatory changes she would propose. Her response reflected the same methodical approach that had defined her questioning. Today wasn't about one company or one document, she stated calmly. It was about whether our markets truly function with the transparency and fairness that all investors deserve. The practices revealed today suggest we have significant work to do in closing the gap between regulatory intent and market reality. That work begins with acknowledging the problem, which I believe we've now done. As she returned to her office, the impact of the hearing continued to reverberate through financial markets, regulatory agencies, and the public's understanding of how Wall Street really operated. What had begun as routine oversight had transformed into a moment of genuine accountability, not through political theater, but through the simple, powerful act of bringing receipts. The days and weeks following the hearing saw the Crockett effect ripple through financial markets, regulatory bodies, and the broader culture in ways that transformed the abstract concept of market structure into a matter of public interest. Within 48 hours, the SEC announced the formation of a special examination team focused on order flow practices and execution quality metrics. The unusual public announcement of such an initiative signaled the regulatory urgency created by the hearing's revelations. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division issued document preservation notices to major market makers, a preliminary but significant step toward potential investigation. Financial markets reflected the changing landscape. Shares in companies heavily dependent on payment for order flow revenue fell sharply as analysts priced in regulatory risk that had previously been dismissed as unlikely. Conversely, companies offering direct market access and transparent pricing models saw stock price increases as investors anticipated a potential shift in market structure. But the most remarkable transformation occurred in public engagement with previously obscure market structure issues. Terms like price improvement, order flow, and internalization entered mainstream discussion as media outlets produced explanatory content for audiences now interested in understanding how their investments were handled. The Crockett hearing, as it became known in financial circles, transformed the political calculus around market regulation. Congressional offices reported unprecedented constituent contact regarding market structure reform, an issue previously considered too technical to generate public interest. This engagement crossed traditional partisan lines, uniting consumer advocates and retail investors across the political spectrum. Law schools and business programs scrambled to incorporate the hearing into their curricula. Harvard Business School announced a new case study, titled The Cantor Document Corporate Communication in the Age of Transparency, while Yale Law School developed a seminar on effective congressional oversight of financial markets. The hearing's impact on corporate governance extended beyond Cantor Fitzgerald. Major financial institutions initiated internal reviews of market practice documentation, with particular attention to language that could suggest technical compliance while undermining regulatory intent. Legal departments issued new guidance on internal communications, reflecting awareness that the traditional gap between public positioning and internal acknowledgement had narrowed significantly. Retail brokers facing new scrutiny of their order routing practices responded with unprecedented transparency initiatives. 3 major platforms announced revised execution quality metrics that more accurately reflected actual investor experience rather than theoretical price improvement. 2 went further, restructuring their business models to eliminate payment for order flow entirely in favor of transparent commission structures. Professional investors noted a subtle but significant shift in market dynamics as practices that depended on information advantages and regulatory arbitrage became less viable. Trading costs for sophisticated institutional investors marginally increased while retail execution quality showed measurable improvement, suggesting a rebalancing of a system previously tilted against individual participants. For Cantor Fitzgerald and Howard Lutnick, the consequences were substantial but complex. The firm announced a comprehensive compliance overhaul and the creation of a market integrity executive position reporting directly to the board. Lutnick himself, while maintaining leadership of the company, adopted a notably lower public profile and declined previously accepted speaking engagements at major financial conferences. Yet perhaps the most lasting legacy emerged in how the Crockett method transformed expectations for congressional oversight. Committee staff reported receiving unprecedented requests from members for more detailed briefing materials and technical expertise ahead of financial hearings. C-SPAN noted significant viewership increases for subsequent financial oversight sessions as audiences anticipated substantive questioning rather than political posturing. Media analysis identified several key elements of what was now commonly referenced as the Crockett approach to oversight. Thorough advanced research, obtaining internal documentation rather than relying on public statements, precise citation rather than general accusation, and maintaining professional composure while methodically establishing contradictions. 6 months after the hearing, its impact was cemented when major financial legislation incorporated what industry publications called Crockett provisions, requirements for standardized execution quality. measurements and prohibitions on practices designed to create technical compliance while undermining regulatory intent in a rare moment of public reflection. During an interview with the Financial Times, Howard Lutnick acknowledged the hearing's significance. "When you've been in this industry as long as I have," he said, "you develop certain expectations about how oversight works." Congresswoman Crockett disrupted those expectations by simply being more prepared and more specific than what we've typically experienced. That's changed how we approach these interactions moving forward. That change extended beyond Cantor Fitzgerald. Congressional testimony preparation for financial executives now routinely included extensive review of internal documentation that might contradict public positions. The information asymmetry that had historically advantaged industry representatives in regulatory discussions had narrowly but meaningfully shifted academics studying the phenomenon. Noted that the hearing's impact stemmed not from changing the rules of financial regulation, but from changing how those rules were monitored and enforced by demonstrating that internal practices could be exposed to public scrutiny. Crockett had altered the risk calculation around regulatory arbitrage strategies throughout the financial system. For ordinary investors, the teachers, firefighters, and small business owners investing for retirement. The technical details of these changes remained largely invisible, but the practical impact materialized in measurably better execution quality, reduced hidden costs, and markets that function slightly more in accordance with their public description. In her district office a year after the hearing, Crockett maintained the same methodical focus that had defined her questioning. When asked by a local reporter about her newfound reputation as the Wall Street watchdog, she redirected the conversation to the systemic issues still requiring attention. "What happened that day wasn't about one document or one company," she explained. "It was about whether we're willing to hold powerful institutions to their own stated standards. The gap between how markets are described to the public and how they actually function remains too wide. Closing that gap requires sustained attention, not just viral moments." That perspective, focusing on systematic accountability rather than individual confrontation, defined how the Crockett effect continued to influence financial oversight. The hearing had demonstrated that effective accountability didn't require attacking financial markets as a concept. It required taking their stated principles of fairness and transparency seriously enough to demand their consistent application for millions of Americans who had previously seen financial markets as an impenetrable system designed to benefit insiders. This shift represented something significant, evidence that preparation and precision could overcome even the most entrenched information advantages, and that systems that appeared permanently tilted against ordinary participants could in fact be rebalanced when their internal contradictions were methodically exposed. If you found value in this exploration of how thorough preparation can bring accountability to even the most complex financial systems, please like and subscribe. With your support, we can continue highlighting moments when substantive oversight cuts through obfuscation to reveal how our economic systems really function. Because understanding these systems isn't just for financial insiders. It's essential for everyone whose financial future depends on markets that work as fairly in practice as they claim to in principle.